Hi, welcome to Ministry Mondays with Meg. I'm Meg, and I currently serve as the national coordinator of the of ABPS, the American Baptist Personnel Services, and Ministry Life. And I serve at the Leadership and Mission Building that's located in King of Prussia for the American Baptist Home Mission Societies. Ministry Mondays is about connecting with people who are serving in various capacities of ministry and hearing their stories. So today I have the pleasure of being joined by my new friend, Reverend Melissa Newberry, who's pastor at Grandview Baptist Church. Melissa, if you'd introduce yourself, tell everybody a little bit about you.
Sure. Thanks for having me. It's a joy to be on the show with you. Yes, I currently pastor Grandview Baptist Church in Kansas City, Kansas. I have now, I'm in my 12th year with Grandview. I was called in the fall of 2010. So I've been with them for now 11 years, started year number 12, which is super exciting. They're a vibrant, smaller congregation made of some pretty brave and courageous people. But also, I'm a second generation American Baptist pastor. I grew up in the church. I was a PK, pastor's kid. My dad was serving in a church in Kansas when I was born. And so for the first 12 years of my life, I got to not only play church, but be at church often growing up. So that's been very instrumental in leadership. And of course, then a second generation graduate of Central Seminary, which is super exciting. Let's see what else to tell you about myself. The history that I have with the American Baptist denomination goes back a long time, as my grandparents were also involved nationally and regionally. So that's my Newberry grandparents and also my mom's parents. So I've deeply rooted to the American Baptist tradition. So that's kind of a little bit about myself. I live in Kansas, Leavenworth, Kansas. And while I don't have any children, I have lots of nieces and nephews of the heart. So they're very special to me. So that's kind of me in a small nutshell.
Well, I had the opportunity to meet Melissa when I went out to Nebraska for the Prairie Pastors Convention. It kind of feels like it's been a while, but that was only what?
Not that long ago.
No,
about a month and change.
Yeah. And when I was telling colleagues about Ministry Mondays and going, so who should I talk to? Your name was one that came up first with several people actually, and you have gone through that process of not selling the church building. And I wondered if you would talk a little bit about what all was involved in that.
Sure. I'm trying to have some very succinct thoughts. I'm glad we're having the conversation now because it has been 4 years. It'll be 4 years this October since we signed the papers to sell the property. So as I shared previously, Grandview was changing in size primarily because it's an aging congregation. And so we were getting to the point where it was becoming a financial decision to move toward the direction of selling the property. And so because at the time that we began the conversations, we were probably about 30 in attendance and we had a larger structure. We also had an older structure that had been built in the 30s and then the 40s and the 50s. And so our building was experiencing the aging process. And as it is, as buildings age, they begin to show their wear. And so it all kind of started a conversation of maybe redoing the sub-basement, which evolved into, well, maybe it's time to think about selling the property. And so in the fall of let me back up. In the spring of 2017, I went and talked to our region staff here in the Central Region And I said, we really need to do something. And so I said, please, please advise me, please pray for this. And so at the time, our executive minister, John Williams, and associate Nate Marsh, and I had conversations about what that would look like. And so then in the summer of 2017, they came and visited, and the advisory board and everyone began to visit about what are our options. And so we had a kind of a church conversation. They came and they visited with us and just guided us through the process. So after much dialogue and prayer and discernment, the vote was taken in 2017 of November to sell the property, to begin to move in the direction of selling the building. And so fast forward to the spring of 2018, and we hired a realtor to sell the property. And so we began the journey of selling. And I'll tell you, probably one of the most shocking things for me, I wish I still had the picture, but one of the most shocking things for me was seeing the for sale sign in the front yard. It was a commercial property in the front of the building. That was shocking. That was kind of the reality smacked me in the face of this was really happening. But the really great thing about it, and now as I'll tell the rest of the story, the really great thing about it was the Lord was preparing another church to buy it. It wasn't an ABC church, but it was a non-denominational, very diverse church in Kansas City, Kansas. And so the long of the short of it was then in the summer of 2018, we met the potential buyers, and it was a pastor who had been serving a church, and their church group was renting a building, and they were looking for a more permanent place to meet. And one of the biggest concerns for my congregation, my brave and courageous congregation who went through this, was that it would just be bought and torn down and the property sold, or it wouldn't be a church anymore. That was a concern for them, legitimate, and or that it would take us years and years and years to sell. It didn't take us years and years to sell. It took us a couple months, actually, for the property to sell. And so the timeline was we met the potential buyers in I want to say late May, early June of 2018. And then we negotiated price. And then we moved out of the building October 31st of 2018. And then we began to meet at First Baptist Church, Kansas City, Kansas, November 4th of 2018. So that's a really short time frame for that to turn around. And so we had our last worship service there that last Sunday of October, and we invited the other church who is going to be now taking over the ministry or the church building at 24th and Grandview. We invited them to come worship with us, and it had to be, Meg, it had to be probably the most holy moment of my whole ministry career, because just as I was finished preaching, literally almost their whole congregation came in the back door of the sanctuary, and the whole mood just shifted, right? Like it was just, so we got this, it was kind of like the handing off the baton. And I can still see it in my mind of them walking in, and then they were near the end of our worship service. And then the pastor, Pastor Dupree from the new church, gave the blessing and the benediction. And then we had a reception downstairs. So the two churches intermingled and met, and we blessed them and they blessed us. And then we were out by that Wednesday. And so that was pretty profound, and that it moved so fast. But God had been working in the background this whole time. So now ministry will continue and is continuing in that building. So that's been probably the greatest gift for us. So that was kind of the process of how we got to it took a year of discernment and conversation. And the other nice thing about the size of our congregation is everybody had a say. Everybody had a vote. Everybody had a part of the conversation. And there were some no's, and understandable, to not sell the property. But we knew honestly that if we didn't sell the property, the time was coming rapidly when we'd have to make some really difficult decisions. And we didn't have to make those because we recognized early it's being the proactive instead of the reactive toward things. Mm-hmm. And so that was a really great gift for us, that we weren't forced to sell the property. We got to choose to sell the property. And of course, now we've gone through the pandemic, we're grateful. We didn't have our large structure. We didn't have to maintain anything. And it would have been much different in the last 2 years if we'd still had our property. But so yeah, so that was kind of how we got to where we are today. The journey to sell the property and to move to stay together. I want to say that also. Um, the church the church made the decision to stay together and not keep the building. A lot of churches make the choice, and understandable, to close the church and dispense and go other places. But every single one of my I call them my little beloved flock. Every one of my members decided they would rather stay together. That was their stronger desire to keep together and keep doing ministry and not to go other places and stay together. So that's also was a driving force, was the glue that held them through this and held me through this, was that, like, whatever it takes, we will stay together as a church. And they have, and we are. And so that was another difference, I think, was that their desire to be in fellowship with one another and stay connected was the thing, really literally, that got us through this and kept ministry going.
So as you were having these conversations, even beginning the process, what were those conversations like? I mean, I can imagine things like grief, but um, what were some of those conversations that took place?
Um, Several conversations, several. I think a lot of it was shock. A lot of my members had been at Grandview for decades, and as I'd mentioned in our conversation when we crossed paths in Nebraska, one of my members was 8. I mean, she'd been a member her whole life, and so when that structure was built, she was 8 years old in 1932, and a lot of them had been there since they were young or young marrieds, and so they'd raised their family there. They'd gone to women's work. They had breakfast. They had all these celebrations. And so one of the greatest things, I think, was shock that they never thought that this day would come. That we would always be in that building, that they would always worship in that particular structure. So there was a lot of that, of like, is this really happening, kind of thing. So that was a lot of the conversation. And the conversation is, well, where are we going to go? Where we're going to go? Where, if we're going to stay together, where are we going to go? And so that was something also, part of the dialogue was some options, because we wanted to stay close geographically to where we were. And fortunately, our relationship with First Baptist Church has existed for decades. And so, and I was also good friends with their pastor. So, and again, that's that groundwork that God is preparing and laying for you that you have no idea is occurring. So that was the bigger thing. And then also we talked about, well, can we stay in the building and rent from the new owners? Well, that was a conversation, but then we all knew that it would be very difficult, I think, to stay in a building that you didn't own, right? And you'd have to ask permission to use the kitchen or whatever it was, or fellowship hall, or you would have to adjust your worship times. So that was also a dialogue. Well, can we just stay here? Well, I'm grateful that we didn't, that we made the physical move. But that was another conversation of where we're going to go. So we were conversing with the First Baptist Church long before, probably in the spring of 2017, the spring of 2017, we began to talk to them. So that was a big conversation, but more than anything, it was, is this really happening? Is this a reality for us? That was one of the main conversations. And then again, what about all of our stuff, right? What about all the things we'd accumulated for 8 decades? So we spent months cleaning out our nooks and crannies, and we got from a whole big structure to one small room.
What do you do with all that stuff?
We had a lot of junk removal trucks, honestly, a lot, and because we didn't have the manpower to do that, and there was a lot of things that probably should have been thrown away years ago. But as we know, we're very good at saving things, and rightly so. But we found things. We found microfilm. We found old directories. We found a lot of things that could have been cleaned out, en route. But we got rid of it, and then we kept what was important to us. We kept our communion. We kept our our pictures, our, the things that were still that we wanted to take with us. But that was a hard thing, what to get rid of and what to keep in this whole transition. That was another hard conversation.
I can imagine because having served as pastor, there was always that one, at least at that one room that you were like, let's not open the door to this, like,
Hmm.
ever. Um, uh, because people just weren't willing to go through and make that purge and things like that. So I I can imagine that must have um, been difficult. Um, I wanted to have you talk a little bit about that whole process of the shifting your mindset in the selling of the building, because I think that's such a beautiful piece of this.
Hmm. It was. We really had to be intentional about the words that we chose, and as their as their as their pastor, not necessarily as their minister or leader. I mean, I am their minister, but as their pastor, we really had to shift our mindset from selling the church to selling the building, because we weren't selling the church. And you know, I think, and I don't want to negate the reality is that that building held so many memories for them. And I remember the churches that I grew up in, and I remember my grandparents' church that was sold and is now a photo studio, right? So I've seen that happen. The church that I was when I would go visit them in Wisconsin had been sold. The building had been sold, and so that was the biggest thing was the verbiage that we would use. We were always if I could get them, if I could encourage them to say we're selling the building, not the church, it almost kind of made it a little less. It kind of took the sting out of it, and understanding. We really got to the point of recognizing and understanding. It says in scriptures the church is the body of Christ, and we were and we are. And so, but yet also, we still needed a place to land. We still needed a structure that we need to meet in. So I don't want to negate the reality of the memories and the good things and the good times and the hard times that happened at that building. So that was the big thing, especially out to a broader conversation. If people would say to me, well, I hear you're selling the church. I'm like, we're not selling the church. We're selling the building. So you kind of even had to reroute the conversation externally because, I think also part of it, when the word gets out that a church is selling their building, it kind of becomes unnerving for everybody else. It's kind of like, well, they've been there for 80 years and now the building's being sold. What's going to happen to us? Because we're a mirror congregation. We look a lot like they do. And so what does that mean for us? So I think it's kind of unsettling for people when they realize that a long established church is selling the building. That was the big thing was, and I still use that verbiage today of like we sold, although we're past that now. But that has to be critical. And anybody looking to what's going to happen for their church in the future is how you promote it, how you share it, but also it has to be a kind of a detachment of we sold the building and not the church.
Yeah. Um, I I hope your congregation recognizes God's hand throughout
Mm,
all of this, because
mhm,
I mean the fact that you were able to turn this around in such a short amount of time,
mm,
that you were able to join with share a building, use space in a building
mhm,
where you already had a connection,
mhm,
um, and that it wasn't this long, drawn out, um, kind of almost like you'd go through a terminal illness kind of thing,
mhm,
like
mhm.
uh, trying to just crawl through the whole thing. That what an amazing thing to be able to do this in such in such a short amount of time. Um, and you said you didn't lose any of your members. Everybody went with you.
Mhm.
That's that is amazing. Um,
Yeah. It's and I wish, if you ever this direction, come stop by and meet my people. They are, they really, and I say they're brave and courageous, and they are, and like I mentioned, my oldest person's 95, and to be willing to do that, like to be willing to say, we would rather stay together than save the building, right? And so I admire them. If I could bring them in studio and you could meet all of them, they're the ones who did this. They're the ones who um, were willing to walk this journey and take this road. I admire their adaptability, and I admire their flexibility, and I admire their recognition of who God is calling them to be. So they saw it. They saw the hand of God moving before we even were aware of it. They knew that the Lord, and still, I think we're still kind of surprised that it sold so fast. Um, that we didn't have that. We were not, like I shared previously, we were not forced to make decisions. We got to make decisions. The Lord allowed such a design that we were given this opportunity to let go of what we loved and not just have to um, being pushed out. And we chose the exit. We chose the exit strategy. And they're an amazing group of people. They are. They're just. I'm telling you, I don't know how I got to end up with them, but they're brave. They're
Yeah,
so brave. And they saw it though. They did. They
good.
really, they really saw the hand of God move and the Lord taking care of every single detail of the whole process.
Which I think is so important that they see God's hand in it, that this
Mhm,
is not a punishment, that this is not we're this way because we did something wrong, we didn't do it
mhm,
right,
mhm,
um, that the decision that we made allows us, like I think, like we talked
mhm,
earlier, allows us to keep going
mhm,
um,
mhm.
as a congregation. So in the current building that you're sharing with the other congregation, do you do you meet just Sundays physically in the building? Is that how it currently works?
We do. We meet Sundays. We have First Baptist Church of Kansas City has a chapel, and so we meet in the chapel.
Okay.
That's our that's our worship space in the chapel. And then, so we meet there every Sunday in person. And then on Wednesdays, we also have a Bible study that has been meeting long before I arrived on the scene every Wednesday morning. And so then we actually meet in the Sunday school room for our Bible study. So we're in person. And I think I shared earlier, um, when we were in the beginning of the pandemic, we could be back in person because we could physical distance in a larger space. And we just had, and yesterday, no, today's Monday, Saturday, we just had our first ABW All Daughters brunch back in person that we hadn't had since December of 2019. So we got to do that again, which was fun. And so, but we're back at it. We haven't really been apart uh, during a lot of this time just because of our size. But no, every Sunday we meet, and sometimes we do a combined service with First Baptist, which is fun. Um, we have some missionaries coming to town in June, so we'll have a combined service for them.
Oh, that's nice.
And so yeah, so that's been fun, and First has been very good to us, and we have that relationship with them, and they're very accommodating, and they have a lot of space to manage and a lot of organizations, but. So we meet regularly. We meet as we have in the past, and so yeah, we're still chugging along.
Is there anything, thinking back, is there anything that you would have done any differently um, in the process?
I don't think so. I don't. I really don't. It's now been. I think I shared earlier. Come this fall, we'll be at it for 4 years. We've been doing this for 4 years. We've been in our new space for, well, not new, but the different space. It's not new anymore. We've been in it for 4 years, and so I don't honestly, Meg. I don't think so. I
I
look
think
back
it's
at my
great.
yeah. I don't, and I'm just the other day when I was on the Lunch and Learn in April and we were talking about it, and I don't think we would have done anything differently. I don't think I would have done anything differently. Um, no, I think it went as it was supposed to, and we're still thriving and trying to figure out what the next phase is and what the next ministry and mission is for our congregation.
I I mean, not that I was intimately involved in it or anything either, but I think your process just seemed to have gone so smoothly. Um, that again, really seeing God's hand in all of it. Um,
I will
so
tell you
as
one
we,
thing real quick though.
yeah,
And you asked earlier about I also don't want to negate the grieving process, right? I think you asked me that earlier. The emotions that we felt, or there was conversations of that, but I think the harder thing, I think probably the most challenging thing for me personally was I was grieving and I had to help them grieve, right? So it's kind of like when you do a memorial service for someone you care about, you're grieving for them, and you also have to help the grieving family or the grieving congregation. So that probably was the hardest part. Was I had to privately grieve. I mean, alongside, and there was tears. There was tears. We there was lots of tears in the process or processing this with them. So that probably was the most challenging part of all of this, was the grieving process of letting go of something so beloved, grieving for me as their pastor, but also walking with them through their grief, of saying goodbye and letting go of a long beloved thing of their life. That was hard. That was very difficult.
um, so in the midst of ministry, um, what what brings you joy?
I would say the relationships I get to have, whether it is with my congregation, or working regionally, or serving with the American Baptist Women, everything I do, or in now serving on part-time region staff as event coordinator, I get to be with people, and I love that. That's the highlight of my ministry, is the relationships I get to add into my life, whether that's through whatever level of involvement that is, whether it's local, regional, or national. That's the greatest thing about ministry that I get to do, is the people part. Sometimes the most challenging is the people part, but the highlight is, and then like as we talked about earlier, crossing paths at the Prairie Pastors Conference. So now it's expanding. So we've now connected and connecting with other pastors. So that's probably the highlight of ministry for me, is the relationships, is getting to know more people and investing in their lives, and their lives investing in me. The two-way investment street. So that's my highlight, is the relationships.
I love the relationship. I love the relationship part of ministry. That's also my favorite. So if folks wanted to join your congregation on a Sunday morning, um, we'd send them to Facebook. Is that where we'd send them?
Yeah, we actually created. We didn't create a Facebook page. We created a Facebook group.
Okay.
And so if you look us up on Facebook, you have to ask to be a member of it. But
Okay.
you can look up, Grandview Baptist KCK. We do have a Facebook page, but I haven't claimed it.
Okay.
Facebook group, you all know that. But,
And
but we do have a group page.
and in person, you guys meet what time and where at?
We meet 10 a.m. Central Time at Grandview Baptist Church, and the address is 2900 Minnesota Avenue in Kansas City, Kansas.
You know there was going to be a quiz at the end. Sorry.
All right.
Sorry about that.
Yeah.
Well, I'm. Is there anything else you want to throw out there before we close?
Um, Real quick, yes.
Yeah,
As there's
absolutely.
been multiple conversations about a lot of things. Um, One of the things I want people to recognize and realize, and maybe move the conversation from closing the church to transforming to something different. That's probably the one of the unique things about the situation is that we didn't close the doors, we didn't close church, or the ministry was closed, but thinking about life beyond the building, right? Thinking about life beyond the the church building in terms of the ministry and the mission may no longer be at that location or may no longer be out of that building. Because as we know, a lot of churches are changing in size and are facing these very difficult conversations. So I'm hoping that as churches begin to face that they recognize that, okay, we can no longer support the structure, but we as a church don't want to discontinue the ministry or the mission. That's my biggest thing. That's my biggest banner, if you will. My biggest um, takeaway from this is that it's kind of like if one congregation can navigate this, other congregations can. So that's my biggest thing is instead of looking toward discontinuing ministry or closing the church or closing the doors, look at what can we do beyond this once we let the property go, once we sell the property. I think that's going to be the conversations in the now and also in the future. That's look beyond the building, which is hard to do. It's we've been so shaped in terms of a church building. So don't necessarily consider closing the church, more consider transitional into something, the future beyond the church building, whatever that may look like.
And I just love when we were talking earlier about, um, I definitely don't want to take credit for it. When you were talking about what God can do with 12 people.
Oh
Um,
yeah. Oh
I,
yeah.
I
It
love,
is.
yeah,
Yeah, and I think that's another challenge we, especially in the Church of the United States, face is and I battle it. I'm not gonna say that I don't battle it. Is the church success is based on the numerical success, which isn't always true, right? I mean, the reality is you have to have people involved in an organization, whatever that is, but also how the world was changed by 12 plus people, right? I mean, and those who also were disciples of Jesus who weren't necessarily in the scripture. So the world was changed by just a handful of people. And I think that's one thing we as the church in the US have to kind of get off that center of saying, there could be just seven of us and still be as effective as, 27 or 37 or 47. So that's the other thing I think that's important too, is not to negate the size of an organization. Obviously, we would like to grow not for necessarily church preservation, but for kingdom growth, right?
yeah,
It's about kingdom growth, and yes, which will translate into church growth. But that's the other thing to look at. I always tell them they're small but mighty, and I believe that they're small but mighty, and we can be just as effective as 15 people as a different size structure, a different size organization. So,
yeah, I
mhm,
agree. I
mhm.
agree. Um, well, I am so grateful for you, for your time, for your congregation, for their faithfulness, to God and walking through this journey. Um, so thank you for
Mhm.
joining me and sharing a piece of their story. Um, and I hope we'll continue the conversation. Um,
I hope so as well. It's just a jumping off point. So,
yeah.
mhm.
So this has been Ministry Mondays with Meg. Um, you can join us Mondays at 11 a.m. Eastern Time, on Facebook, on YouTube, on the American Baptist Home Mission Society's page, and then they will be rebroadcast. So I have enjoyed my time with Reverend Melissa Newberry, the pastor of Grandview Baptist Church in Kansas City, Kansas. And thank you so much.
Yep. Thanks for having me. It's been fun.
My pleasure.
Mhm.